Some movies just lose money and everyone moves on. Others flop so hard, even the directors try to erase their names out of pure embarrassment. We're talking Walter Hill hiding behind a fake name, a sci-fi epic that bankrupted its backers before it even hit theaters, and a Kiefer Sutherland drama that bombed so hard it became the last movie in history credited to Alan Smithee. Seriously, some of the biggest names in film would rather wear a bag over their heads than take credit for what you're about to see. Now, here's a question for you. How does the guy who wrote Taxi Driver and Raging Bull get railroaded this badly? That's what happened to Paul Schrader with Dying of the Light. Nicolas Cage is the lead here, playing an ex-CIA agent with dementia, out to settle a score with the terrorist who tortured him years before. The premise is pretty wild. If they'd just let Cage go full Cage, maybe it would have worked. But the studio had other plans. Schrader finished his cut, handed it in, and the studio immediately started demanding changes. Schrader refused. The studio fired his editor, brought in their own, and recut the whole film, cutting voiceover, chopping up the action, basically trying to make it more mainstream. They claimed most of it was still Schrader's vision, but he wanted nothing to do with the final product and disowned it. Same goes for Cage and Anton Yelchin, who were so annoyed they took a protest photo together wearing t-shirts with the non-disparagement clause from their contracts, which is about as much as you can do when you're legally not allowed to talk trash about your own movie. The film absolutely tanked at the box office, just $74 grand on a $5 million budget. This one's just the definition of wasted potential. $55 million budget, Oscar winners like Charlton Heston and Jack Palance, a name director, and nothing to show for it. Plot's as generic as it gets. Astronauts go into space to drop a bomb in the sun to stop a killer solar flare. If you're getting flashbacks to Boyle's Sunshine, which also flopped by the way, you're not wrong. Hollywood, apparently, never learns. The production was such a disaster that the director, Richard Sarafian, wanted his name off it. So he used the legendary Alan Smithee credit, the go-to alias for directors who'd rather not be associated with whatever ended up on screen, and it's not hard to see why. Solar Crisis crashed and burned, pulling in just $1.6 million on a $55 million investment. The Japanese backers were so sure this thing would be huge, they actually announced a theme park. Needless to say, that never happened. Michael Mann made a horror movie once. He doesn't talk about it for good reason. The Keep is one of those movies Mann spent his entire career pretending never happened. He didn't even want to make a horror film, and said as much before it came out. Genre just didn't interest him at all. The story's about Nazi soldiers in a Romanian fortress who accidentally unleash some ancient evil. The actual production was a nightmare. The studio forced weeks of reshoots. Special effects were redone over and over because Mann couldn't decide on the monster, and then the visual effects supervisor died halfway through. Mann's original cut was 210 minutes, but the studio hacked it down to 96. The end result was basically incoherent. The movie bombed, critics tore it to shreds, and it never got a proper release except for a random DVD in Australia in 2020. Mann refuses to talk about it. Seriously? Bring up The Keep in an interview? You'll get nothing. Can't really blame him after all that. Burn Hollywood Burn is a film about a director trying to take his name off a terrible movie, and no surprise, that's exactly what happened in real life. Joe Esterhazy, coming off Showgirls, wrote this as a satirical mockumentary about Hollywood egos. Arthur Hiller was brought in to direct, but after disastrous test screenings, Esterhazy basically hijacked the edit, cutting the film up, adding random rock music, and making things even worse. Hiller was so appalled by what was left that he took his name off the movie, and it was officially credited to Alan Smithee. The end result was ridiculous. Just over $52,000 at the box office, 5 Razzie Awards, and the Directors Guild retired the Alan Smithee credit for good. That's right, this movie was so bad it literally killed Alan Smithee. This was supposed to be a straightforward sci-fi thriller, but in reality it was a total nightmare. Walter Hill, the guy who made The Warriors and 48 Hours, got dragged in to try and save it. Studios slashed the budget, fought him every step of the way, and eventually, Hill just quit. MGM panicked, brought in another director for reshoots, and then hired Francis Ford Coppola to try and salvage what was left. Didn't work. Coppola tried to be polite about it, but there was nothing to be done. The movie missed its release by 2 years and finally got dumped into theaters, where it made a whopping $14 million on a $90 million budget. Hill was so embarrassed, he used the pseudonym Thomas Lee in the credits. Screenwriter David Wilson put it politely, "Walter's vision of the film was different from the studio's. It's a shame that couldn't be resolved during production." Here's a movie Dennis Hopper pretty much tried to erase from his own resume. Catchfire came out in 1990, $10 million budget, made about $5. If you've never heard of it, there's a reason. Hopper directed it, but hated the finished cut so much that he slapped the Alan Smithee name on it and walked away. The movie's got a stacked cast: Jodie Foster, Hopper himself, Vincent Price. The story is pretty standard. Jodie Foster witnesses a mob hit, gets put in witness protection, but Hopper plays the hitman who just can't let it go and basically turns the whole thing into a weird obsession. Supposedly, Hopper's original cut was about 3 hours, but what ended up in theaters was just 98 minutes, and even by his own admission, couldn't be saved. Critics weren't kind. Variety summed it up best. "Somewhere in here is a dark, sassy picture, but what we got instead is more like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing." For 10 years, fans begged for a third movie with Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman. What they got instead was a reboot that somehow managed to make everybody involved regret ever picking up the phone. Neil Marshall, who'd done some pretty solid horror movies, came in to direct. And after it was all over, he called it the worst professional experience of my life. Not subtle about it either. The script was shit. The decision to make the film was a mistake. You can't polish a turd, no matter how much you try. This one had a $50 million budget, made just about 55. That's not a hit, that's just about covering your embarrassment. And look, the studio knew they screwed up because instead of trying to fix this version, they've just rebooted Hellboy again last year. And that went as well as you can expect. Shot on a budget of $20 million, it earned just $2 million worldwide. This one's a teen comedy so ridiculous that not one but 2 directors bailed on it. You've got John Cryer playing a kid home from boarding school trying to fix his dysfunctional family. Simple enough. But the production was a mess from the start. The first director, Terry Windsor, got fired 4 weeks in. They brought in Paul Aaron, who had to redo a ton of footage. And when the dust settled, Aaron hated the finished product so much, he took his name off it too. Critics destroyed this movie too. There's a review that basically blames Alan Smithee for everything. Says the camera wanders all over, soundtrack is bland, and the editing is a total disaster. And as for the box office, the movie cost $7 million and made less than $200,000. I mean, that's not even lunch money for a Hollywood shoot. This is one you're not supposed to remember, and Hollywood's just fine with that. Cheech Marin playing an American slacker working in a Mexican restaurant in Australia. The plot is pretty much rich girl hires Cheech to pretend to be her awful boyfriend to annoy her dad. As you might guess, it bombed. $5.5 million budget didn't even crack $500,000 at the box office. The director, Michael Gottlieb, same guy who did Mannequin, had his name taken off, replaced by Alan Smithee. After a couple more movies like this, he left Hollywood altogether, ended up teaching screenwriting. I'm sure Don't Let This Happen to You was lesson number 1. Now this one's different. The Insider actually got some of the best reviews of Michael Mann's career. 7 Oscar nominations, including Best Editing. But Disney thought it would be the next All the President's Men. Big hit, big awards. Didn't happen. The movie cost $90 million, only made about 60. Problem was, it just didn't click with younger viewers. Studio execs said the main crowd was over 40, and even people who loved it couldn't convince anyone else to go. Not notably dramatic marketing called it. Even the Disney chairman, Joe Roth, admitted, "Everyone is really proud of the movie." But it's one of those rare times when adults loved a movie, yet they couldn't convince their friends to go see it. I mean, that's about as honest as you're gonna get from a studio head. Mann actually disowned the version that aired on TV. The edit was so bad, he used the Alan Smithee credit for the broadcast cut. This one's kind of infamous in its own way. Kiefer Sutherland directs, stars, and then, after seeing the finished film, decides to erase himself from history. It's a romantic drama about a housekeeper in the middle of some weird family feud between a widower and his adult son. Not a single person asked for this movie, not one. And by the time it finally hit screens, even Sutherland wanted nothing to do with it. It bombed pretty badly, made just $55 grand against a $15 million budget. Woman Wanted was the last film ever to go out under the Alan Smithee name. Kiefer Sutherland pulled his own name off the movie, and after that, Hollywood finally retired the whole Alan Smithee thing for good. Probably not exactly the legacy Kiefer was hoping for.